Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jensen Clarke. I'm the head of business development for Fengate. And today we're here to talk about inclusion and how it pertains to infrastructure procurement. Our panel takes a closer look at the current state of inclusivity practices in infrastructure and development, including the recent trends in the United States and in Canada. We'll also discuss the best practices to promote inclusivity in local employment while ensuring value for money for all partners involved. Joining me are three leading industry experts to share their knowledge. Priscilla Chavez, Business Development Manager with PCL Construction. She's a 10-plus year veteran of relationship building within Southern California. Priscilla embraces the value found at the intersection of strategic owner relationships, small and diverse business engagement, and local community investment. Niilo Edwards is the Executive Director of the First Nation Major Projects Coalition. Through the work of the coalition, Niilo works with First Nations across Canada to ensure they have the access to the technical advice they need to achieve inclusion as partners in the development of major infrastructure and natural resource projects. And last but not least, Stephanie Vaillancourt, President of SNC-O&M and SNC Capital. Stephanie represents a trusted long-term relationship with equity partners and authority entities alike. And before I get into it, I'd just like to quickly say that diversity and inclusion are important aspects of Fengate's culture. Fengate is committed to supporting the advancement of equity, belonging, inclusion, and diversity across our firm and the industries at which we are involved. So without further ado, Stephanie, I'd like to start with you. How has SNC changed in the last while to foster inclusion?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Bon après-midi, tout le monde. Ma partie en français, c'est une conférence inclusive. So for SNC-Lavalin, it's a very important journey for us. It's personally a very important journey for me also. So last year, we did our first, not in this October, but the October before, we did a full month of diversity, So we started discussion. So every meeting in the corporation worldwide started with a moment on ED&I. So this year, we had our second. Our second was two main subjects, inclusive design. So we want to bring the conversation not only in SNC-Lavalin, but how can we get our partner to be much more inclusive? We also have, the other discussion was about allyship. How can we make sure that everyone in the corporation participate to that discussion? We also have established target this year. We announced that we have target. Right now, the target only regarding gender diversity, but we are in the process of having other target around more than just diversity. We also have regional challenges in Canada. We have a big focus on how can we work more closely? How can we work more with Aborigine? And I'm sorry if I don't pronounce it well. It's very close to the French pronunciation. So I'm really sorry for some people. So it is, this is the main discussion we have. How can we partner more with them? How can we make sure that we are very inclusive with the city, the corporation we work with? We have different target in the US, different target in the UK. So we are really in that journey, and I'm personally very involved. I'm part of the Canadian ED&I committee. I'm leading the Quebec ED&I. So this is what we have been doing at SNC, and it is a journey, and will continue in the future years.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was great. Priscilla, how are you?
Doing good, Jensen. Greetings from sunny California, Southern California. So
how has PCL changed over the last few years?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And, I've been with PCL, it'll be 6 years in January. And, we've hired a director of diversity, inclusion, and equity that leads our efforts for both Canada and the US. And, when I got hired, just shortly after this national director got hired, certainly I think we weren't really aware of what this could mean to our clients, what this could mean to our communities. And And you and I, Jensen, met circa 2016. We were chasing a really large infrastructure project in Los Angeles. And I think that project was so critical to, I think, the development of what DE&I could be as an external facing effort. And so really focusing on supply chain, subcontractors, design partners, consultants, as well as, workforce development. How is it that we're going to actually transform the communities that we're building in from, not just being focused on building these amazing world-class structures, but also becoming a first-class neighbor. And obviously after, getting awarded on this project, certainly we've seen a lot of the rewards that's paid out into how we become that external partner. However, in the last couple of years, we've certainly seen that effort permeate other districts and other parts of our business. Internally, the conversation has also shifted. So I love what Stephanie said about this being a journey, because really it is. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so I think for PCL, we recently just adopted, equity into our sort of core value of diversity and inclusion, and really taking a look at internally reflecting, how is it that we're recruiting, attaining talent? How are we trying to grow and develop that talent? And how are we, really focusing on retention and really kind of looking at a 360-degree, I think, perspective on how DE&I impacts us, impacts our clients, impacts our partners, and, of course, impacts the communities where we live and work.
Absolutely. Niilo, how is the coalition? How has it been changing, and what do you see looking forward?
Well, thanks, Jensen. It's nice for me to be able to join you from Coast Salish territory here in Vancouver. Our organization has a mandate to work with both our member First Nations across Canada and industry and government on convening mutually shared interests around large-scale infrastructure and major resource projects. This is, right from the early project planning phase to completion, and everything in between. And so when you talk about inclusion, the inclusion of Indigenous interests in project planning here in Canada is paramount. I think it's fair to say that no matter where your infrastructure project is, there's going to be some impact to Aboriginal and treaty rights, and corporate Canada is best served to include those Indigenous interests in the project early on. One of the central messages from our organization over the last couple of years is to work with progressive partners in corporate Canada and in government to really change the narrative where once the Indigenous communities were seen as a cost center to project development. Now we're seeing a change where corporate Canada and governments are viewing the inclusion of Indigenous communities as a value add, increasing the value of the project by including Indigenous communities as equity owners, including Indigenous companies and people in the supply chain and the labor force of major projects. So there's tremendous value to be unlocked, not only for our member communities in terms of skills development, management training, and building a stronger economy, but that also directly relates to where we're going as a country and our ability to increase our productivity and our inclusion overall. So from our standpoint, these are the things that we are focused on.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and we'll get into further detail later about your comment on value add. I mean, value for money is really why we're all here, and that's a very important comment that you made. Building on the discussion, and Stephanie, I'll hand it back to you. How are you seeing the procurement of major projects change, or are you seeing any change in how major projects are being procured?
For example, like if you think about the labor, like in BC in 2018, they introduced like key infrastructure on the project, some quota, for example, for apprentice, preferential to hire women, indigenous worker, and stipulation that work on the project must be syndiqué. Sorry about that. It's very inclusive to speak some French. But I think exists much more opportunity to have target that is over labor. We need to make sure that in the qualification, there's inclusive. For example, if you think about the key individual qualification, they need 15 years, 20 years of experience in Canada. How can you be inclusive, to change this? You need to have different target. So I think there's work that has been done. But I think if we want to be a contract that is much more inclusive, we need to change some of the target. We need to make sure that some of the target would be what is the social impact on the project. It's more than just labor quota. What is the lead on the project? We need diversified. It's not just people with 15, 20 years experience in Canada. If it's only that, we'll have always the same people coming. So I think the journey has started, but I think the journey needs to start with the procurement.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I know on the equity side of things, especially in the US, we are starting to see the requirement for inclusive equity partners. And as a developer, it is tough, I must say, finding an experienced inclusive equity partner. But if the requirements are changed, like you say, it'll be much easier to include smaller firms that are trying to get their legs under them. So I agree with everything you just said.
And I think the target needs to be across the life cycle of the asset. Because, if you think about major infrastructure project, the project start, there's a construction, there's a design, there's a construction. But after, there's all the operation and maintenance. So you need to make sure there's target about all the life cycle of the asset that is in the equity. It's every place in the project.
Yeah. Priscilla, any thoughts?
No, I think that you just pointed something out really important, right? And that's that, in the US, I think we're seeing certainly a lot of clients seek, inclusion, not just, in the construction aspect, but really throughout, the consortium, if it's, especially in P3s, right? And so, Jensen, when we worked on that project together for LAX, which is a large owner in Los Angeles, certainly there weren't any goals associated with the equity portion of the project, but there was with design, construction, and operation and maintenance. And so I think we are seeing those requirements shift and evolve. And certainly I think that, obviously, I think with the incident of George Floyd, certainly I think, diversity, inclusion, equity, has really now, I think it was in our face before. And certainly, I think now has a spotlight. It has really pointed out, I think, in the US at least, it has highlighted and spotlighted the opportunities that still exist with lots of underrepresented groups. And so I don't think this is, it's not going to go away. And I think creates a really great opportunity, going back to Niilo's comment about this value add, right? And really kind of taking a look at, what talent is out there for both, business partnerships and also workforce.
Anything to add, Niilo, on that?
No, I mean, I think Priscilla did an excellent job covering it off there. Again, the value that is driven from a coordinated strategy around inclusion cannot be understated. And in fact, particularly here in Canada, with the legal landscape around Indigenous rights, it's really imperative when it comes to de-risking the project to make sure you have community support for what you are doing.
And in particular, Niilo, I mean, you would be referencing issues around land acquisition, permitting, a lot of those issues, which can be major hurdles in procuring infrastructure projects, can be expedited with the right local support.
Yeah, that's correct. And we're working with our members to make sure that they have the tools to articulate their interests, so that all parties involved in a project opportunity can get to a destination of certainty where the community is happy, the investors are happy, and the project proponent is happy with proceeding.
That's excellent. I'd like to turn, I guess I'll just, to build on the conversation, I'd like to talk a bit about investing itself. I know we have, most of us are involved in investing here in one way or another. I would say that from Fengate's perspective, we have had a real impact on how our firm does business. We are trying to continuously evolve. From a triage and deal perspective, a lot of we have triaged out a lot of deals that are not either inclusive or ESG focused. We've been focusing on different types of deals these days. We were recently given an award for ESG Deal of the Year, if you can believe it or not, for our Prince George County schools P3. Why? Because it not only allows the school to refurbish itself by deferring its funding, but it also provides local businesses with subtrade opportunities, as you say, Priscilla. I would mention that. I'd mention that because there is inclusive equity now, we have partnerships across the U.S. with inclusive equity firms. I'd give a quick plug to American III Partners. We work with them quite a bit now, and we formed an alliance where we share information and resources. We have our own internal EBIT committee, so equity, belonging, and inclusivity think tank that helps to shape the best practices of our company corporately, and so on and so forth. So I think that it really has shaped us on how we do business, and I'm enthused on the future of where this takes us. Anything else from an investing standpoint, Stephanie? Like how has the investment committee at SNC Capital changed to address ESG and inclusive requirements and aspirations?
So at this stage, Capital does not have a corporate policy about ESG. We have, as a corporation, ESG policy. We also make sure that we report on all our projects, what is the standard, and we want to make sure we're inclusive. So at this stage, we didn't have a policy, but as a corporation, we have one. So that is going to translate into Capital in the near future. And we make sure that on all the assets we have, we do the ESG reporting. As I mentioned at the beginning, when I did the introduction of SNC, ESG is really important for us. So that, even if we don't have a clear Capital, it's an important aspect of our decision.
Yeah. Anything, Niilo? I saw you jump in there. Anything else on the investment side that you've seen change?
Well, when you talk about ESG, I think that's the next big area that is going to involve Indigenous people. And I'm again speaking from a Canadian context. We've done a lot of research in this area as an organization because we recognize that ESG has been a construct of the private sector that has been really developed without any input from Indigenous communities. So you have, in some cases, a blind spot with investors who are using an ESG screen to look at different risk profiles, one of them being Indigenous interests, without actually having those metrics informed by Indigenous people. So that's a bit of a blind spot. When we were doing our ESG research, we also recognized that the standards themselves did not make reference to Indigenous interests, except for GRI, which in GRI the Indigenous interest only becomes material to the investor when a court challenge is launched. And that's pretty significant. So we've been raising awareness about this. I think there's a movement afoot with IFRS to establish a new standard that we and other organizations, other Indigenous organizations, have been engaged in. And so we look forward to continuing that conversation, because at the end of the day, it's about making sure that there's inclusion of our members' interest in that, so that we can get to a market standard that really reflects a proper risk screen that out there.
Thank you, Niilo. Thank you for that. And as I guess, Niilo, staying with you, and we've been talking about investment and impact. How do we continue? What can we do as a country to advance and to continue the impact of inclusivity, whether it be at a federal, provincial, or municipal levels? What can we do?
Well, it get back to my earlier comments on inclusion, and I think for a lot of our members, particularly when they're looking at rate regulated opportunities in the utility sector or other investments that are underpinned by ship or pay contracts that are really, decent investments even for the private sector. Those opportunities should make room for Indigenous equity participation. The problem we face, that our members face, oftentimes is not having enough at-risk capital to attract an effective interest rate from capital markets. So we've been advocating for the federal government to devise a national strategy around Indigenous access to capital, to foster more inclusive relationships that provide better certainty, de-risk projects, and ultimately unlock a new class of economic contributors in society, where a lot of our members have been precluded from the real benefits in the order of magnitude that the private sector and governments have received from either project revenues or taxation, and to be able to unlock those for communities so that they can use those revenues to invest in community infrastructure, to raise the standard of living, and ultimately diversify their economies. I think this is where we have to go, and it's becoming more imperative as we look towards a sort of an energy transition or the quest to net zero. Fueling that transition is going to take further investment in infrastructure. And we need to make sure that there's an inclusive strategy around that includes everyone, including Indigenous communities. And that can't happen unless we have an effective cost of capital available.
Yeah, well said. Any other ideas on advancing the impact in the future?
Maybe I can go. I fully agree with Niilo. I think, we must recognize that our commitment to the local and First Nation community where we work. I think it's important that we involve them in all the projects. I think it's important that they are involved from the start and they are involved in the life cycle of the project. I think, that discussion must continue. I think the discussion at start, but that needs to continue. I think on the procurement, there's change that needs to happen in the procurement. We need to have more integrity target in the full life cycle of the project. So as I mentioned, I'm very confident that, if you want, Niilo was talking about equity investment, but the life cycle of a project, yes, equity is there, but there's the O&M also, there's the design. So, there's the life cycle. I think there needs to be financing model that will consider also the high social economic return. Right now, it's always an NPV, but I think there's the economic return that needs to be included. I think, in the bidder experience, sometimes we need to make sure that we have criteria that would be more inclusive, that it can be different people that can bid, because if right now some criteria is that the experience is not there, so you cannot really bid. So I think the journey has started. I think we all have our role to play. There's the government, but there's also the corporation, and also the financing community. The financing community are asking for ESG. So I think it's a journey, but the journey, we all have a role to play. But I think it started, but I think we need to accelerate it. And it's not just at one place. I think it's everywhere if we want to be successful.
Certainly, and I mean, I'm on board with what, both Stephanie and Niilo are saying. I mean, I think when we look at, from a standpoint of procurement, looking at evaluation criteria and also taking an inward look at, especially if it's a public agency or if there's, public funds involved, how are the deals procurement being set up? Is there unnecessary red tape? Is there unnecessary hurdles that would keep, underrepresented groups out? And what opportunities are there to evaluate those, in terms of risk? The evaluation criteria, I think, is really important, especially, when, you're looking for innovation and creativity. And so I think that this creates an opportunity to create competition amongst, the finest, in industry to be able to provide solutions, I think, really for social and economic impact. And then I think, to the point that Niilo mentioned before, you said, the word awareness, and I think this is really important because I think there's still a lot of groups that don't understand like this world and the opportunities that exist. And so, not just from the equity side, but, to Stephanie's point on the O&M side, which really creates it's a long life cycle, for individuals, even as workers, to be involved in. And yet, how are they finding out about opportunities? And so I think collectively, there is a place and a role each one of us can play, really, to make sure that, we're raising the tide, really for all of us.
Maybe one thing I would like to add is that probably need KPI just to make sure that this is measured and, on all major infrastructure. And sometimes, the discussion about inclusivity, some people, they don't feel concerned. It's this year at SNC, one of the subjects was allyship. Everyone is concerned about this discussion. We all different. So I think people need to understand we all different. This is a discussion because, when you start a D&I committee, reality, you will see minority and women on those. The discussion is about everyone. So I think everyone that is listening, it's a subject for all of us.
And then I think, Jensen, you mentioned something interesting before too, that you had success in the US with a partner. And there isn't enough of that. I think storytelling and sharing about, hey, we have these requirements. This is how we did that, right? And being able, I think, to share those best practices and lessons learned, I think certainly can equip, agencies, government in how they could advance some of these initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love everything that's just been said. I mean, what I think's been effective, like I think in the US, Priscilla, like we've seen DBE goals involved in P3 projects and other major projects for the last like almost 10 years, at least as long as I've been bidding US P3. And I think in Canada, like our P3 projects are slowly starting to get these, Stephanie. Like we've seen some rumblings in Tremblay and some of the other federally procured projects. They're not clear really yet, but I think because, I hate to say it, but because we are capitalists, we need the procuring entities to put the guidelines in for inclusivity. We need them to relax some of the qualifications for these firms to allow them to participate. And also, I like the idea of the multiplier, of having, like, if there's an economic multiplier that we can forecast because of a firm's involvement, that should weigh into the procurement, because ultimately that's what infrastructure is. It's to better the economy. Anyway, no, this is very fascinating. We've only got about 10 minutes or so left, and I want to make sure we have some time for Q&A. And as the Q&A is rumbling in, the one thing I wanted to ask all of you is, if I'm a minority-owned business, how do I get in touch with you? And how do I get involved with your company? And what are the perhaps trades or alliances that your company is looking for at the moment? And maybe Priscilla, I'll start with you.
Sure, and I'm happy to sort of be the point person. PCL, of course, we have operations across Canada and the US, but happy to be the point person. My email, I can give that out, is pnchavez, CHAVEZ @pcl.com. and certainly happy to, channel you to the right people in our operations. And I think when I look and think about partnerships, certainly, we're always looking to meet and greet with new design partners and consultants, and of course subcontractors and other building partners for sure as well. So yeah, that's how you get in contact with us.
Niilo.
Yeah, thanks. A couple of things. We're here mainly to provide capacity services to First Nations communities in resource development and infrastructure projects. However, we also have a convening power to our organization where we're able to bring together industry, government, and our members for discussions on mutually held interests and to work through some of the challenges that bigger projects face in dealing with multiple smaller communities that may be under-resourced to engage. We are also there to provide advice. We have a number of people that have years and years of experience advising on these complex situations. And we often find that for the private sector, there aren't a lot of places to turn to get that advice. So I'd just like to put it out there that if you think we can be helpful, just drop us an email, pick up the phone. Our contact information is available on our website at fnmpc.ca. Lots of resources on there too, so I'd encourage people to go take a look, and I'm sure there's something on there that can be helpful.
Stephanie.
Thank you. So we are a large corporation, so there's many people you can contact, but if you don't have any name to contact, I would be pleased. You can reach out to me. So my email address is my first name. You can probably see my last name at SNC-Lavalin.com. So thank you. I would be pleased to talk to anyone about it's a very subject that is important for me. So happy to talk to everyone about it.
Okay, excellent. And I think I'm getting the hook here. So so with that, I wanted to say thank you very much to our three panelists. I've been looking forward to this discussion for a long time, and I hope everybody who's watching is enjoying the conference. I miss you guys. See you later.
Thank you.
Cheers.